What happens when one of the most respected actors in Hollywood sits down for what should be a routine interview, only to find himself defending his entire career against accusations he never saw coming? The tension in the studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as a simple conversation about his latest project turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on in this debate. Because trust me, you're going to have opinions. Alan Rickman walked onto the View set with his usual composed demeanor, that distinctive voice already familiar to millions from his iconic roles. The audience applauded warmly as he took his seat, and the panel greeted him with smiles. Whoopi Goldberg opened with pleasantries about his recent film work, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed perfectly normal. The conversation flowed easily as they discussed his approach to character development and his thoughts on the current state of cinema. But then, Joy Behar leaned forward, and the entire atmosphere shifted. "Alan, I want to ask you something that's been on my mind," Joy began, her tone already carrying an edge that made the other hosts glance at each other. "You've played so many villains throughout your career. Gruber, Snape, the Sheriff of Nottingham. Don't you think there's something problematic about always being cast as the bad guy? I mean, what does that say about how Hollywood sees you?" Alan's eyebrow raised slightly, that signature expression that fans knew well. "Problematic?" he repeated, his voice measured. "I'm not sure I follow your logic, Joy. Are you suggesting that playing complex antagonists is somehow a negative reflection on me as a person?" "Well, I'm just saying," Joy continued. "It's interesting that you never seem to get the hero roles. You're always the guy we're supposed to root against. Maybe it's time to examine why that is." The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, but Alan remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on Joy. "I chose those roles," he said quietly, but with unmistakable firmness. "Every single one of them. They weren't thrust upon me by some Hollywood conspiracy. They were offered. I read the scripts, I found them compelling, and I accepted them because they presented challenges that interested me as an actor." Joy waved her hand dismissively. "But don't you see how that limits you? You're pigeonholing yourself into this narrow category. I watched your performance in that Robin Hood film, and honestly, I found it a bit over the top. All that scenery chewing and melodrama." The audience went quiet. Sunny Hostin looked down at her notes. Sarah Haynes glanced at Whoopi, clearly hoping someone would intervene. But Whoopi remained silent, watching the exchange unfold. Alan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Over the top," he repeated softly. "That's your professional assessment of my work, is it? Tell me, Joy, how many years did you spend training in classical theater? How many Shakespearean villains have you inhabited? How many times have you had to find the humanity in a character that could easily become a cartoon?" "I'm not an actor, Alan. I'm a comedian and a host," Joy shot back. "But I know what I'm watching, and I know when someone is just doing the same thing over and over again. Your Snape was basically just a grumpy teacher. Where was the depth there?" Now there were actual gasps from the audience. Alan leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet register that anyone who knew his work would recognize. "Where was the depth?" he asked. "Joy, I spent 7 years building that character, knowing from the beginning where his story would end, unable to tell a soul, having to layer every moment with the knowledge of his sacrifice. I had to make audiences believe he was one thing while he was actually another. I had to make a room full of children convinced I was their enemy. And you're sitting there telling me there was no depth?" Joy crossed her arms. "I'm just saying what a lot of people think. You've made a career out of being cold and distant. Maybe that's just who you are." "Now we're getting personal," Alan said, his voice still eerily calm but with steel underneath. "You've moved from critiquing my work to making assumptions about my character. That's quite a leap for someone who's known me for all of 15 minutes. Whoopi finally stepped in. I think what Joy is trying to say is, I know exactly what Joy is trying to say, Alan interrupted, something he rarely did. She's trying to provoke me. She's trying to create a moment for her show by attacking my choices and my craft. What I don't understand is why. Joy leaned back, a slight smirk on her face. See, there's that coldness I'm talking about. Can't you take a little criticism without getting defensive? Defensive? Alan's voice rose slightly for the first time. You just called my most celebrated work shallow and suggested that my casting reflects some personal failing. You dismissed years of dedication to my craft as repetitive and one note, and when I respond with actual substance about my process, you frame it as me being unable to take criticism. That's not criticism, Joy. That's provocation disguised as conversation. The other hosts were frozen. The audience was completely silent. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Alan wasn't finished. I've sat through hundreds of interviews, he continued, his words precise and cutting. I've answered the same questions about every role I've ever played. I've been gracious with amateur interviewers and professional ones alike. But I will not sit here and have my life's work reduced to scenery chewing by someone who seems more interested in landing a viral moment than in having an actual discussion about art. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? Joy said, her voice rising to match his. I ask you a legitimate question about your career choices and suddenly I'm the villain? Maybe that's why you play them so well, Alan. Maybe it comes naturally. The sharp intake of breath from the audience was audible. Even Whoopi looked shocked. Alan stood up slowly, and for a moment, the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. You know what the difference is between the villains I play and what's happening right now? Alan asked, his voice deadly quiet again. The villains I play have motivations. They have reasons for their cruelty, their antagonism. They're written with purpose. What you're doing here, this casual cruelty disguised as just asking questions, that's far less interesting and far more common. He remained standing, looking down at Joy with an expression that somehow conveyed disappointment, anger, and complete control all at once. The moment stretched out, tension crackling through the studio like electricity. Sarah Haynes tried to lighten the mood. Well, this has certainly gotten heated. Maybe we should. No, Alan said firmly, still looking at Joy. I think we should continue, because I want to understand something. You invited me here, presumably because you wanted me on your show. You had countless directions this conversation could have gone. You could have asked about my theater work, my directing, my thoughts on the industry. Instead, you chose this. So I'm genuinely curious, Joy. What were you hoping to accomplish? Joy's face flushed slightly, but she didn't back down. What I was hoping to accomplish? I was hoping to have an honest conversation instead of the usual promotional fluff. I was hoping you might actually be interesting instead of just reciting the same rehearsed answers every actor gives. Honest conversation, Alan repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of that characterization. Is that what you call it when you insult someone's work and then act surprised when they don't simply nod and smile? That's not honesty, Joy. That's ambush television. Oh, please, Joy scoffed. You actors are so sensitive. I say one thing that isn't glowing praise and suddenly it's an ambush. Grow up, Alan. This is daytime television. If you can't handle a little back and forth, maybe you should stick to your precious theater, where everyone tells you how brilliant you are. Whoopi tried again to intervene. Joy, I think maybe we should. No, let her finish, Alan said, sitting back down slowly, deliberately. I want to hear this. Please, Joy, continue telling me about my precious theater. I'm fascinated by your insights into a world you've never inhabited. I don't need to be a chef to know when food tastes bad, Joy snapped back. And I don't need to be an actor to recognize when someone is coasting on their reputation. You've been playing the same character with different names for 20 years. Dark, brooding, mysterious. It's a formula. And frankly, it's boring. A formula, Alan said, his voice dangerously soft. Tell me something, Joy. When you wake up every morning and come to this show, do you prepare the same way? Do you sit in the same chair, use the same tone, make the same kinds of jokes? Or do you reinvent yourself completely each episode? That's different, Joy argued. I'm being myself. You're pretending to be someone else. Exactly, Alan said, leaning forward. I'm creating art. I'm transforming. Every character I play requires me to find something new, something true, something that makes them live and breathe. You say I'm playing the same person, but Severus Snape shares nothing with Hans Gruber except that they both exist in my voice. Their motivations are completely different. Their pain comes from different places. Their choices stem from different worldviews. If you can't see that, that's not a failure of my performance. That's a failure of your observation. Joy's eyes narrowed. So now I'm stupid? Is that what you're saying? I'm saying you're lazy, Alan replied, and the bluntness of it made everyone in the studio react. You're lazy in your criticism, lazy in your questioning, and lazy in your understanding of what actors actually do. You want to create controversy, so you throw out inflammatory statements and hope something sticks. But you haven't done the work to back up anything you're saying. I have done the work, Joy insisted, her voice getting louder. I've watched your movies. I've seen your performances, and I'm telling you what I see. If you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. What you see, Alan said slowly, is filtered through your own limitations. You see what you're capable of seeing, which, based on this conversation, is not very much. The audience gasped again, and Sarah Haynes actually put her hand over her mouth. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to disappear. Whoopi was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Joy stood up now, matching Alan's earlier gesture. How dare you come on this show and insult me? I've been doing this for years. I've interviewed hundreds of people. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Alan asked, also standing again. Because from where I'm sitting, what you're doing is confusing confrontation with conversation, rudeness with honesty, and your opinion with objective truth. Those are amateur mistakes, Joy. And you claim you're not an amateur. I am not an amateur, Joy said through gritted teeth, and I'm not going to be lectured by some British actor who thinks he's better than everyone else. There it is, Alan said quietly. When the arguments fall apart, we go for the nationality. What's next? My age? My appearance? Maybe you'd like to comment on my accent? That seems to be about the level of discourse you're comfortable with. You know what your problem is? Joy asked, pointing at him. You can't handle the fact that not everyone worships you. You're so used to people fawning over you that the minute someone tells you the truth, you fall apart. I'm not falling apart, Alan said, his voice still remarkably controlled despite the anger clearly simmering beneath. I'm standing here calmly explaining to you why your entire approach to this interview has been misguided. The fact that I'm not raising my voice or resorting to personal attacks doesn't mean I'm falling apart. It means I have self-control. Perhaps you should try it sometime. Self-control? Joy laughed, but it was harsh and brittle. You're standing here insulting me to my face on my own show, and you're talking about self-control? I haven't insulted you, Alan corrected. I've criticized your professional choices and your approach to this interview. That's not an insult. It's an assessment. You, on the other hand, have called my work shallow, boring, repetitive, and over the top. You've suggested that my casting reflects personal failings. You've dismissed decades of work with a wave of your hand. If you can't tell the difference between those two things, that explains quite a lot about how this conversation deteriorated so quickly. Whoopi finally stood up, clearly ready to take control. Okay, I think we need to take a breath here. No, Joy said sharply. I want to finish this. Alan, you came on this show with an attitude from the moment you sat down. That is simply not true, Alan replied. I answered Whoopi's questions pleasantly. I engaged with every topic that was raised. The attitude, as you call it, only appeared when you began attacking my work, and even then, I responded with substance rather than insults. Everything I've said to you has been based on the actual words that came out of your mouth. Can you say the same? I can say whatever I want, Joy declared. This is my show. Actually, Whoopi interjected, it's our show, and I think we need to. Please, Alan said, holding up a hand. Let Joy finish. She's on a roll. I'm curious to see where this goes. You're mocking me now, Joy accused. No, Alan said seriously. I'm genuinely interested in watching someone double down this hard on such a weak position. It's actually quite fascinating from a psychological standpoint. You've been backed into a corner by your own words, and rather than acknowledge that maybe you approached this wrong, you're just getting angrier and more defensive. It's human nature, really. But it's not particularly admirable. Joy's hands were shaking slightly now. You are the most arrogant man I have ever interviewed. Arrogant, Alan mused. An interesting word choice. Is it arrogant to defend one's work when it's attacked? Is it arrogant to expect basic professionalism from an interviewer? Is it arrogant to respond to insults with reasoned arguments? If those things make me arrogant in your eyes, then I'll wear that label proudly. You think you're so smart, Joy said, her voice tight. You think you're so much better than everyone else. I don't think I'm better than everyone else, Alan replied. But I do think I'm better at my job than you are at yours, at least based on today's evidence. And before you accuse me of arrogance again, consider that you started this by telling me I was bad at mine. Sonny finally spoke up, clearly trying to salvage something. Maybe we can talk about your upcoming projects, Alan. What do you have coming up next? Alan looked at Sonny, then back at Joy. I appreciate the attempt to redirect, Sonny, but I think Joy and I need to finish this. She started something here, whether intentionally or not, and I don't believe in leaving things unresolved. There's nothing to resolve, Joy insisted. I asked you some questions, you didn't like them, and now you're throwing a tantrum. A tantrum, Alan repeated, and there was something almost amused in his tone now. Joy, I've remained seated or standing calmly throughout this entire exchange. I haven't raised my voice beyond normal conversation volume. I haven't resorted to name-calling or personal attacks. I've addressed every point you've made with specific responses. If that's your definition of a tantrum, I'd hate to see what you consider reasonable discourse. You're twisting everything I say, Joy complained. No, Alan countered. I'm responding to exactly what you say. That's not twisting, that's engaging. And if you don't like how your own words sound when they're examined, perhaps you should choose them more carefully. The silence that followed was deafening. Joy looked around at her co-hosts, perhaps expecting support, but found only uncomfortable expressions. Even the audience seemed unsure how to react, caught between the sharp intelligence of Alan's responses and the familiar comfort of their regular host. You know what? Joy said finally, her voice shaking slightly. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be lectured by someone who takes himself so seriously that he can't even handle a simple critique. It wasn't a simple critique, Alan said, his patience clearly wearing thin now. It was a series of poorly thought-out attacks, disguised as questions. And the moment I pushed back with any substance, you've spent the entire time trying to make me the villain, which is ironic, given your earlier comments about my career. Maybe I was right about you, Joy said. Maybe you are just cold and difficult. Alan's expression hardened. And maybe you're exactly what you appear to be. Someone who mistakes rudeness for boldness, controversy for content, and aggression for journalism. I've worked with some of the finest directors, actors, and interviewers in the world. I've had challenging conversations with brilliant people who knew how to push without being disrespectful, how to probe without being insulting. You're not doing any of that. You're just being mean and calling it honest. Mean? Joy's voice cracked slightly. You're calling me mean after everything you've said to me? Yes, Alan said simply. Because everything I've said has been in response to what you initiated. You threw the first stone, Joy. You can't be surprised when someone throws it back with better aim. Whoopi stood up fully now, her voice firm. All right, we need to wrap this up. Alan, thank you for coming on the show. Are we done already? Alan asked, looking at Whoopi with raised eyebrows. I thought we were having an honest conversation. Isn't that what Joy wanted? Don't twist this around, Joy said, her voice rising again. You came here with an agenda. My only agenda was to talk about my work, Alan replied. You're the one who decided to turn it into something else. And now that it's not going the way you planned, you want to end it. That's convenient. I want to end it because you're being impossible, Joy insisted. No, Alan corrected. I'm being difficult. There's a difference. Impossible would mean there's no way to have a productive conversation with me. Difficult means I'm not going to simply smile and nod when someone disparages my life's work. If you can't handle difficult guests, perhaps you should reconsider your career choice. Sarah Haynes looked genuinely distressed. I think we're all just tired, and maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We got off on the wrong foot because Joy decided to use me as a punching bag, Alan said, not unkindly to Sarah, but firmly. I appreciate your attempt to smooth things over, but let's not pretend this was some mutual misunderstanding. This was one person attacking and another person defending themselves. Joy pointed at him, her finger trembling. The people watching this are going to see you for what you are, an arrogant, cold, difficult man who can't take any criticism. Let them, Alan said calmly. I'll take that risk, because I know what actually happened here. I know that I came prepared to have a real conversation about craft and art and the work I love. And I know that you chose to make it personal, to make it ugly. If people watch this and think I'm the problem, then perhaps they deserve the kind of television you're trying to create. What is that supposed to mean? Joy demanded. It means, Alan said, his voice dropping to that quiet, dangerous register again, that there's a choice in how we communicate with each other. There's a choice between substance and spectacle, between discourse and drama. You made your choice very clear today, and I made mine. I chose to actually respond to your arguments instead of just matching your energy. I chose to defend my work with specifics instead of vague accusations. Those were all choices, Joy, and they say something about both of us. Whoopi put her hand on Joy's shoulder. I think we really do need to go to commercial. Of course you do, Alan said, standing up and beginning to remove his microphone. Because God forbid we actually see something real on television. You don't have to leave, Whoopi said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she meant it. Actually, I do, Alan replied. Because if I stay, Joy is going to keep trying to provoke me, and I'm going to keep responding with actual arguments, and eventually, one of us is going to say something that can't be walked back. I'd rather leave now with some dignity intact. Running away, Joy muttered. Alan stopped, microphone halfway off, and looked at her. After everything we've just discussed, after I've stood here and engaged with every single thing you've thrown at me, you're going to accuse me of running away? You're leaving, aren't you? Joy challenged. I'm leaving because there's nothing left to say, Alan responded. You're not interested in actually listening. You're interested in being right. But here's the thing, Joy. Being loud doesn't make you right. Being aggressive doesn't make you honest. And being unwilling to admit when you've mishandled something doesn't make you strong. It makes you stubborn. I have plenty of substance, Joy shot back. Then why haven't you demonstrated any of it today? Alan asked. You had a chance to have a real conversation with me about acting, about character development, about the choices that go into creating memorable performances. Instead, you went for cheap shots and personal attacks. So forgive me if I question your claim. Joy opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "You are impossible." "So you've said," Alan replied. "Multiple times now. It's almost like you don't have anything else to say." The finality in his voice seemed to take the energy out of the room. Alan finished removing his microphone, handed it to a crew member, and looked at each of the hosts in turn. "Whoopi, thank you for trying to mediate," he said genuinely. "Sarah, Sonny, I apologize that you had to sit through this." Then he looked at Joy. "And Joy, I genuinely hope you think about this conversation, not about who won or who lost, but about what kind of interviewer you want to be." "Don't you dare lecture me," Joy said, but there was less fire in it now. "I'm not lecturing," Alan said quietly. "I'm just hoping that maybe, somewhere beneath all this defensiveness, you'll realize that there was a better way to handle today." He turned and walked toward the exit, his posture straight, his pace unhurried. Just before he reached the door, he paused and turned back one more time. "One last thing," he said, addressing the audience now. "If you found this uncomfortable, if you wished it had gone differently, then maybe it's worth thinking about what we're all participating in when we tune in to this kind of thing. We're all responsible for the culture we create." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a stunned studio and a panel that seemed unable to quite process what had just happened. Whoopi stared at the door for a long moment before finally turning to the camera. "Well," she said with a long exhale, "that was something." As the show cut to commercial, Joy sat down heavily in her chair, and for the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely shaken. If you found this story fascinating, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment below answering this question. Do you think Alan was justified in how he responded? Or should he have just let Joy's comments slide? I want to hear what you think.